Question 1. With the advent of advanced scripting practices in enterprise environments, understanding the nuances of variable handling is crucial. Fatima's writing a shell script that processes a list of files and appends their file names and sizes to a log. She assigns a variable files with the output of a find command and then loops over it. However, her script fails when file names have spaces or special characters. Which of the following best explains the root cause and resolve it? A. The variable should be declared with export to persist across the loop. B. Command substitution must be replaced with eval to pass complex output safely. C. If should be set to new line before the loop to properly pass file names. D. The find command should be replaced with ls. Alpha safe for passing. Answer. Correct answer. C. Explanation. The issue arises from word splitting in bash when assigning files equals for find. By default, the internal field separator if splits on spaces, tabs, and new lines, breaking file names with spaces, setting ifs equals and ensures line-by-line passing. Export only affects child processes, not loop handling. Eval is dangerous due to code injection risks. ls. That output is meant for humans, not scripts. This is aligned with best practices in POSIX shell scripting. Question 2. In light of recent developments in remote access control, managing SSH access with fine granularity is essential. David, a system administrator, wants to ensure only users from a specific IP range can SSH into a server. He also needs to log all login attempts and enforce key-based authentication only. Which configuration strategy will meet all these requirements? A. Modify etchosts. Allow and set password authentication known as hdconfig. B. Add the IPs to X known hosts and use PAM for logging. C. Use IPtables to block unwanted IPs and keep password authentication. Yes. D. Add DEN users in hdconfig and configure audit for SSH logins. Answer. Correct answer. Explanation. Editing etchosts. Allow in conjunction with etchosts. Deny restrict to access based on IP. Setting password authentication known xconfig enforces key-based auth. PAM can assist logging but isn't required if using default syslog. SSH known hosts is for client verification, not access control. DEN users is username based, not IP based. See OpenSH documentation and TCP wrappers. Question 3. To better understand the impact of shell customization on system-wide behavior, consider this scenario. Maria modifies EC profile to set a custom path for all users. However, some users report their environment variables remain unchanged unless they use bash explicitly. What is the most plausible reason for this inconsistency? A. The user's default shell is not bash, so EC profile is ignored. B. Maria should have edited EC bashisk instead. C. EC profile is only written by graphical login shells. D. The custom path is being overwritten in bash profile. Answer. Correct answer. Explanation. EC profile is executed only by login shells. If users are using a different default shell like ZSH or dash or starting non-login shells e.g. via terminal emulator, it may not be sourced. Also, bash profile or bashisk may override EC profile settings. Understanding the difference between login and interactive shells is key here, as documented in the GNU Ash reference manual. Question 4. Contrary to popular belief, simply rotating logs does not ensure secure logging. Daniel has configured our saslog to rotate logs weekly, but his varlog directory is filling up. He also notices that some logs like auth log are missing. Which configuration or action is most likely needed? A. Set the rotate directive in at clogrotate.conf. Add missing facilities in syslog.conf and restart our saslog. C. Set the proper time zone in at clogrotate. Dorth. D. Change permissions of varlog messages to 777. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. If logs like auth log are not appearing, it's likely the facilities aren't properly configured in syslog.conf or related includes. After adding appropriate lines e.g. authbrief star varlog auth log, restarting the daemon is necessary. Log rotation doesn't generate logs. Permissions like 777 are a security risk and unnecessary. Refer to our syslog documentation and man our saslog.conf. Question 5. A detailed analysis of Linux accessibility reveals the importance of universal usability. Elena, who is visually impaired, logs into a GNOME desktop but finds the screen reader isn't starting automatically. Which of the following would most likely solve this issue? A. Install Orca and configure it in GNOME accessibility settings. B. Add screen reader equals 1 to the grub bootloader. C. Use Xrandr to increase screen resolution. D. Disable Selinux, which blocks assistive tools. Answer. Correct answer. Explanation. Orca is the default screen reader for GNOME. After installing it, sudo apt install Orca, enabling it in GNOME accessibility settings, or auto start ensures it runs. Xrandr changes display resolution, not accessibility. Brob has no such screen reader equals 1 option. Selinux doesn't typically block Orca. Refer to GNOME accessibility documentation and freedesktop.org standards. Question 6. Throughout the course of system hardening, Jake decides to switch from Wayland back to Zorg due to compatibility issues with legacy applications on Ubuntu 22.4. However, even after selecting Zorg at login, the session still uses Wayland. What could be the cause of this persistence? A. Wayland is hard-coded in the kernel and cannot be disabled. B. Zorg is not installed. Only the compatibility layer exists. C. The display manager is defaulting to Wayland and overrides session choice. D. Zorg needs to be launched via Synattac. Answer. Correct answer. C. Explanation. GDM, the default display manager for GNOME, prioritizes Wayland unless explicitly configured otherwise. Editing custom.conf to set Wayland enable equals false forces it to use Zorg. The session selection alone doesn't always override this. Zorg is available in Ubuntu by default. Synattac applies mainly to Startex-based sessions. Refer to GDM and GNOME documentation. Question 7. Taking into account the decentralized printing setup in a university lab, Henry needs to configure multiple printers using CUPS so that print jobs are balanced. Which feature of CUPS allows this load balancing across several printers? A. Printer alias is B. Printer class is C. Print job affinity D. CUPS daemon forking. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. Printer classes in CUPS allow grouping multiple printers together. When a job is sent to a class, CUPS automatically assigns it to the first available printer. Aliases are just alternative names. Affinity is not the CUPS term. Daemon forking relates to background service management reference. CUPS documentation by Apple. Question 8. As a result of expanding to new markets, a company needs its servers to support Japanese, Arabic, and German users. Alex configures eclocale gen and runs localgen, but still some apps display incorrect characters. What is the most probable issue and how can it be resolved? If locale files weren't applied globally with logalogdal. B. The system lacks font packages supporting those languages. C. Environment variables lang and LC or conflict. D. The shell doesn't support update. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. Even if locales are generated, apps won't render characters correctly without the necessary font support, like fonts-no Ishake, fonts-no to Arabic. Localauto applies settings but doesn't install fonts. Our fate is supported in modern shells. LCOR can override lang, but won't affect font rendering. Refer to Linux localization guide and font config documentation. Question 9. A comparison with SDM and Lightem EDM has advanced integration with GNOME. Thomas recently switched from KDE GNOME but still sees the KDE login greeter. What is the correct way to permanently set GDM as the default display manager on a Debian-based system? A. Manually edit Xdefault display manager and reboot. B. Use update alternatives. Config X session manager. C. Immediately configure DDM and select GDM from the prompt. D. Change the exec directive in USH sessions. Answer. Correct answer. C. Explanation. On Debian Ubuntu system, EEG configure DDM provides an interactive method to select the default display manager among installed options. This updates X default display manager and associated services. Editing that file manually is discouraged. X session manager controls session, not the display manager. X sessions files define session types, not the login GUI. Refer to Debian display manager switching guidelines. Question 10. To illustrate this point, consider this scenario. Neum configures postfix to act as a null client, only sending mail to an external relay. However, mails still remain in the queue. He confirms the relay is reachable. Which configuration is likely missing or misconfigured in this case? A relay host must be set in at postfix main CF. B. A aliases must redirect route to the admin. C. The my destination parameter must be set to localhost. D. Postfix should run in AED mode instead of send mail mode. Answer. Correct answer. Explanation. For a null client relay host in main, CF must specify the external SAP server to which mail is forwarded. Without this, mail intended for external domains is queued locally. My destination tells postfix what mail to accept for delivery. In a null client, it should typically be empty or localhost. Mode isn't the issue. Postfix handles both sending and receiving. Aliases are unrelated to queuing. See postfix null client configuration. Question 11. When analyzing persistent connectivity issues, network stack configuration must be considered. Marcus notices that despite correct IP settings, his system cannot reach certain external domains. Internal ping works, but external ping fails. What is the most probable cause of this issue? A. The MTU is too large for external routing. B. No default gateways set in the routing table. C. Ecresolve.conf is missing domain entries. D. It is misconfigured and blocking outbound traffic. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. If internal connectivity works but external doesn't, the likely issue is missing or incorrect default gateway IP route. Without it, traffic outside the subnet can't be routed. Resolve.conf affects domain name resolution, not IP routing. MTU issues can cause packet drops but usually affect large transfers. If it doesn't block it for traffic, refer to man IP route and to CPIP networking fundamentals. Question 12. The most significant aspect of diagnosing connectivity is validating each network layer. Aaron can ping remote IPs but cannot resolve domain names. Browsers and cull fail. Which diagnostic step is most appropriate first? A. Test DNS resolution using DBWhost. B. Restart the system network service. C. Add Google's DNS to edge hosts. D. Reset firewall rules to default. Answer. Correct answer. Explanation. Since IP connectivity works but names don't resolve, it's clearly DNS resolution problem. The best diagnostic step is to use dig lookup or host to test resolution. Etchosts is static and not scalable for internet domains. Restarting services or firewall resets are premature. Refer to DNS troubleshooting guides. Question 13. By evaluating different approaches to secure backup archives, Chen creates a .gz file and wants to encrypt it using symmetric encryption for simplicity. Which dpg command is best suited for this task? A. dpg. Symmetric archive. .gz dpg. Encrypt. Sign archive. .gz gpg. Genki archive. .gz dpg. Armor. Out to archive gpg archive. .g. Answer. Correct answer. Explanation. To encrypt a file using symmetric encryption where the same password is used to encrypt your crypt use. Symmetric. The other options either generate keys signencrypt using asymmetric methods or only armor output without encryption. Refer to mid-GPG at a symmetric encryption section. Question 14. The validity of SSH-based user restrictions is critical in controlled environments. Amira needs to ensure that a user named diffuser can only access the server via SSH using a specific command and not a full shell. She also wants to prevent diffuser from using SSH for tunneling or file transfers. Which of the following is the most secure method to achieve this? A. Add permittee known shd config and restrict shell to binfalse. B. Add command equals Wasserbin status SSH before the key in diffuser, authorized keys. C. USCP to force the user to only upload files. D. Configure xUAs to deny shell access. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. Using the command equals. A directive in the authorized keys file forces execution of that command upon login, and SSH actions like no tie, no port forwarding, etc. can further restrict capabilities. This is highly secure and specific. Shell changes like binfalse might block login entirely. SCP doesn't enforce command limits. Sudo restrictions don't affect SSH sessions directly. Refer to MNSHD 8 and OpenSHKey options documentation. Question 15. With respect to managing high-volume print environments, MEL configures CUPS and notices frequent delays in print jobs. Investigation reveals that users often submit the same print job multiple times during slowdowns. What is the most effective configuration to handle this issue? A. Enable print job caching in CUPS using print caching, yes. B. Limit simultaneous print jobs per user using max job sprucer. C. Set job priority in cups.conf to favor active users. D. Configure retry intervals in lpq.conf. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. CUPS allows configuring limits using directives like max job sprucer, which prevents users from spamming the queue. This addresses the root cause, redundant submissions. Print caching is not valid CUPS option. Job priority must be set per job and does not manage fairness. There is an lpq.conf ES status tool. Refer to CUPS administrative documentation and cups.conf 5. Question 16. Looking at the data on interface configuration, Zara edits etnitplan on net YAML on Ubuntu 22.4 server to assign a static IP. After applying with netplan apply, the system loses all network connectivity. Which mistake most likely caused the issue? A. YAML syntax was invalid due to missing indentation. B. The interface name was not in quotes. C. A reboot is required after all netplan changes. D. Netplan must be reinstalled to apply new settings. Answer. Correct answer. Explanation. Netplan uses YAML, which is indentation sensitive. A single space can invalidate the file, causing interfaces to fail on reload. Common issues include incorrect indentation, tabs instead of spaces, or improper nesting of addresses and gateway. Interface names do not require quotes. Reboots are not required. Reinstallation is unnecessary. See netplan, EO documentation, and man netplan. Question 17. To what degree does configuring Zorg from scratch help system administrators? Elias installs a minimal Linux system and adds Zorg. Upon launch, X fails with no screens found. He has no Zorg.conf file. What should Elias do next to resolve the error? A. Create xorg.conf manually with a screen section. B. Install appropriate video drivers for his hardware. C. Use StartX as root instead of a user. D. Set display equals 0 in the shell environment. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. Without appropriate GPU drivers, Zorg may not detect or initialize screens. This is a common cause for no screens found. Modern Zorg usually auto-configures without Zorg.conf. Running StartX as root is discouraged and unsafe. Display variables matter after X is running, not for launching it. Refer to Zorg logs and documentation. Question 18. Examining the consequences of clock drift, Okta Patel sets up Cronid instead of TD on embedded devices with intermittent connectivity. Why is Cronid the better choice for this setup? A. Cronid uses less RAM and is licensed DPLV. B. It can synchronize with intermittent connections and handle system clock frequency adjustments, so TD lacks support for IIB, which is critical. D. Cronid runs in kernel space and avoids user space transitions. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. Cronid was designed for systems with non-continuous network access like laptops or embedded systems. It tracks system clock drift and adjusts more quickly their TD. RAM and license are not the core reasons. Both support IIF. It still runs in user space. Refer to Crony documentation and the Red Hat Guide to Time Synchronization. Question 19. The foundation of a secure server is controlling services. AHEEM disables and uses daemons but discovers that Telnet is still accepting connections after a boot. What is the most reliable way to disable Telnet permanently on a system-based system? A. Remove the Telnet binary from usabin. B. Add itables rules to block port 23. C. Mask the Telnet service using system to mask Telnet. Socket D. Edit ethernet.conf and comment out Telnet entries. Answer. Correct answer. See explanation. On systemd systems, telnet may run via its socket unit, and system till mask ensures it's completely disabled even if another unit tries to start it. Removing the binary isn't maintainable. Itables helps, but it doesn't stop the service from running. Inet.conf applies only if using traditional Inet, not systemd. cman, systemtool, and systemd unit documentation. Question 20. As demonstrated by multi-region deployments, James configures lang equals JP. Our fate, but finds shell scripts still display garbled characters when echoing localized content. What is the most appropriate next step to resolve this? A. Reboot the system for locale changes to take effect. B. Ensure the terminal supports upfate encoding. C. Replace echo with print for better Unicode handling. D. Remove Basherski as it may override lang. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. Even if the locale is set, if the terminal emulator doesn't support upfate, characters can appear as garbled. Tools like GNOME Terminal, Hexterm, or Tmux must be properly configured. Reboot isn't required. Echo supports Unicode under POSIX shells. Basherski may override variables, but typically not lang. See locale and terminal encoding documentation. Question 21. A digital repository has implemented a checksum verification system but does not routinely monitor or respond to checksum mismatches. According to ISO 16363-2012, what is the primary risk this poses? A. Failure to retain user access logs for internal audits. B. Inability to detect digital object corruption. C. Breach of confidentiality due to data exposure. D. Lack of stakeholder engagement in preservation planning. Answer. Correct answer. B. Inability to detect digital object corruption. Explanation. Regular checks and validation is essential for detecting data degradation or corruption, a key requirement under Clause 5.1 of ISO 16363. Question 22. Which of the following best exemplifies compliance with ISO 16363-2012 requirement for succession planning? A. Publishing open access metadata in Dublin Core. B. Maintaining backup power generators for disaster recovery. C. Documenting procedures for transferring responsibilities during staff turnover. D. Encrypting stored digital objects for security. Answer. Correct answer. C. Documenting procedures for transferring responsibilities during staff turnover. Explanation. ISO 16363 Course 3.2.2 emphasizes documented succession planning to ensure continued repository operations amid personnel changes. Question 23. A repository has outsourced a major component of its bit-level preservation to a third-party vendor. Which clause of ISO 16363-2012 is most directly applicable when evaluating the adequacy of this arrangement? A. 531. Metadata completeness. B. 341. Financial sustainability. C. 511. Ingest documentation. D. 353. Contractual agreements with external parties. Answer. Correct answer. D. 353. Contractual agreements with external parties. Explanation. This clause requires that responsibilities of external service providers be clearly defined and contractually enforced to maintain trustworthiness. Question 24. A digital repository provides unrestricted public access to all its stored data. Which ISO 16363-2012 compliance concern may this raise? A. Unauthorized destruction of obsolete content. B. Violation of access control requirements. C. Inadequate software version documentation. D. Improper storage media labeling. Answer. Correct answer. B. Violation of access control requirements. Explanation. Course 4.2.4 requires repositories to enforce appropriate access restrictions. That unrestricted access may breach legal or contractual constraints. Question 25. During an audit, it was found that a repository had policies in place but no mechanisms for verifying staff adherence to them. Which core ISO 16363 component is likely non-compliant? A. Organizational infrastructure. B. Digital object management. C. Security risk management. D. Preservation planning. Answer. Correct answer. A. Organizational infrastructure explanation. Clause 3.3.1 stresses the need for documented procedures and monitoring mechanisms to ensure compliance with repository policies. Question 26. Which scenario best demonstrates a repository meeting Clause 4.1.1 of ISO 16363-2012 regarding the identification of content information, A. Conducting annual penetration tests, B. Assigning persistent identifiers and detailed metadata to digital objects, C. Using redundant power supplies to support data centers, D. Encrypting files during transfer to cloud storage. Answer. Correct answer. B. Assigning persistent identifiers and detailed metadata to digital objects explanation. Clause 4.1.1 focuses on ensuring that content information is clearly identified to enable long-term preservation and access. Question 27. In assessing a repository's audit trail for significant digital object changes, which of the following would be non-compliant with ISO 16363-2012? A. Recording metadata schema upgrades. B. Logging the reason for object deletion. C. Storing logs in volatile cache only. D. Keeping fixity check results for each object version. Answer. Correct answer. C. Storing logs in a volatile cache-only explanation. Logs must be durable and auditable over time. Clause 4.4.2 requires reliable retention of provenance and audit information. Question 20. Which measure best aligns with ISO 16363-2012's emphasis on the ongoing viability of repository systems? A. Automatic email notifications for object ingest. B. Periodic review of software dependencies and hardware obsolescence. C. Redaction of personally identifiable information. PI. D. Providing mobile access to repository holdings. Answer. Correct answer. B. Periodic review of software dependencies and hardware obsolescence explanation. Clause 5.2.1 and 5.2.2 support system longevity by requiring mechanisms to track and manage technological change. Question 29. A repository fails to notify its designated community about changes to access tools. What clause of ISO 16363-2012 is being potentially violated? A. 4.3.1. Data fixity. B. 3.5.2. Legal obligations. C. 4.2.3. Understandability by the designated community. D. 5.1.2. Ingest quality control. Answer. Correct answer. C. 4.2.3. Understandability by the designated community explanation. This clause stresses that repositories must ensure content remains understandable to their intended audience, including through communication of tool changes. Question 30. What is the primary rationale behind ISO 16363-2012 requiring repositories to maintain documented preservation strategies? A. To satisfy donor obligations. B. To promote access by third-party aggregators. C. To ensure consistent and reliable long-term preservation of digital objects. D. To support real-time content synchronization. Answer. Correct answer. C. To ensure consistent and reliable long-term preservation of digital objects explanation. ISO 16363 requires documented and evolving preservation strategies. Clause 4.2.1 to address the challenges of long-term digital stewardship.